Hi folks, my name is Don Parker and I am a member of First Unitarian Church at Hobart, Indiana. I am serving as chairperson this year for CAUUC. We have a few attendees who signed up who are not from this area, so for their benefit, CAUUC is the Chicago Area UU Council of Congregations that is a working group of Chicago area Unitarian Universalist congregations. I want to welcome you to our conference, which is about a topic very timely for, as I'm sure everybody that's sitting here knows, which is the proposed changes in Article 2 of the UUA's bylaws. And Article 2 is the portion of the UUA's bylaws that includes the 7 principles that we all know so well. The discussion that's going on in many of our congregations is wide-ranging and hopefully is a respectful one. And so that's what I want us just to all keep in mind today, is that we presumably come here with different points of views and different understandings about exactly what the proposed changes might entail and how they're going to work. And so I hope that we would all be mindful of our covenant with each other, which exists in an unspoken way, where we are respectful and listening to each other and learning more as we take the information that we're going to get today back to our member congregations and help them to understand what's going on with the proposed changes to Article 2. I also want to make an appeal for participation in CAUUC. There are about, 13, something like that, 12 or 13 Unitarian congregations in the Chicago area that, and we only have active participation from about half of them. So if you, in the first place, if you know somebody in one of these other congregations, communicate with them, let them know that there's a kind of an umbrella organization that they can participate in to help them strengthen their own congregational life as well as their service to communities. And if you are not an active participant on the CAUUC board, we encourage you to speak to your congregation about possibly you participating or having somebody from your congregation participate on the CAUUC board. I am not a very good chairperson. I've missed half of this year's meetings because of work generally. So it's a forgiving organization. And Lord knows Mike Gilley is the most forgiving soul I think I know. But it's an organization that obviously gets strengthened as each of our congregations just get strengthened if we participate and take the opportunities. And so with that, we have a worship to begin today's activities, and after that, Mike will talk a little bit more about the actual agenda for the rest of the day. Thank you all for coming today.
Got some of our kids helping me today. I always think children can teach us the way. And they're bringing in a sleigh filled with knowledge and a sleigh filled with extra books, including one I'll be introducing to you today called Widening the Covenant, right? Widening the Circle. And I wrote about it in the newsletter this month. So check your email if you can't find it. Bring that up there so you can see this. You hold up that book for me, that blue one right here. Yeah, hold that up nice and high. I told you ways to read this for free or listen to it for free. If you want it in a bound copy like this, it's $15 with the UUA bookstore. All right, so that represents our ongoing learning and how we're always adding learning to our covenants. Thanks, kids. You put that there. I'll call you back later to help me get it out of here. All right. So thank you very much. I'm glad they have mass on today. So we're always adding things to our covenants, you know, and it's really important. Hi, Reverend Scott. Oh, okay.
No, those of you who may know me, I'm Scot Giles. I am the affiliated community minister to this congregation. My pronouns are he, his. I am dressed entirely in black. I wear glasses, and I am as bald as a newborn baby's behind. Today, Reverend Denise is leading us in an exploration of the idea of covenant, which has always been the glue that has held Unitarians, Universalists, and since merger in 1961, Unitarian Universalists together in community. Now, many religious communities use a covenant to define who does not belong. We use our covenants to define who we want to be included. We seek to widen our communities, not to make them more restrictive, and we change our covenants as society and needs change. And I'm here to share some ideas with our interim minister. So I want you to consider this covenant. Our faith is in the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, the leadership of Jesus, salvation by character, the progress of mankind, onward and upward forever. Oh, and by the way, when you say that, you're supposed to take your index finger and point it at the ceiling.
Is it like Dan's fever?
Yeah, come on, get it up there. Give the church the finger here, onward and upward.
Okay. Issues with that one, Reverend Scott. Do you want to try again?
Oh, sure. I'm a minister. We never shut up. Maybe this one's an improvement. We believe in the Holy Ghost, whose office it is to make known to sinners the truth of their salvation through the medium of the Holy Scriptures, to reconcile the hearts of the children of men to God, thereby dispose them to genuine holiness. Maybe we want to add the perfections and the will of God and the rule of faith and practice.
You almost should bang on the
Nice.
rule and practice.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah.
I like getting things. I'm a martial artist after all. Now, she looks a little doubtful, doesn't she? Well, so maybe we want to affirm our belief in the Lord Jesus Christ, our Savior, the Son of God, and his specially appointed messenger and representative to our race. And while I'm at it, why don't we add to implement the vision of one world, striving for a world community founded on the ideas of brotherhood. Because, of course, testicles are important. Now, maybe some addition to our covenant about the traits normally associated with the feminine, the good, and all that. But we've always considered those secondary.
And inferior, right?
Always happy to help out.
Yeah. Inferior, right, Reverend Scott?
Sure.
Yeah. Thanks for these suggestions. Now, of course, you must be kidding, but for my own curiosity, what covenants in religion did you even pull those from?
And obviously, here's where I get serious instead of sarcastic, folks. And obviously, Denise and I planned this. These various covenants were each part of the voted on principles and purposes of either Unitarians, Universalists, or Unitarian Universalist congregation, ranging in years from 1790 to 1981.
Again, 1981, please.
In fact, that one onward and upward forever, giving the church the finger and all. In New England, where lots of our congregations are, you'll find that inscribed in sanctuaries on the wall of church school rooms and above the doorway. Founded, by the way, written by James Freeman Clark, one of our great Unitarian ministers of the 19th century. We changed these covenants because we believe that covenants and ideas should change.
Let's not, yeah. So, thanks, Reverend Scott. We're hoping to welcome folks to our worship today, and with these historic, but not that long ago, all of them, principles and practices. And you'll hear about how the principles and practices are changing. In an interim time, we always look at both history and mission and vision and leadership. So it's a time for us to take a look, and our UUA, all of the constituents have reminded us that it's time in our bylaws to review the covenants and to review the principles and all of the practices. So today's service is about widening the covenant, widening the sources, and that's why we have a pile of books here. We're always learning in Unitarian Universalism, and these statements Reverend Scott shared may seem limiting now or even bananas, but at a time, they represented our best thinking. And as we learn more ways to help one another grow, and for us to be, I always think of Unitarian Universalists and coming to church as the place that we learn and practice and become foot soldiers for other justice issues. Feeding us feeds other justice issues. So as we grow more and learn to do better and help one another, our journey is to keep pulling one another in to practicing the covenant more and widening our Unitarian Universalism. Thanks.
Good morning. All right, we're going to light our chalice today with these words. When the fire of commitment sets our mind and soul ablaze, when our hunger and our passion meet to call us on our way, when we live with deep assurance of the flame that burns within, then our promise finds fulfillment and our future can begin. Now, if you please join me in reciting the words on the screen. From the dreams of youthful vision comes a new prophetic voice, which demands a deeper justice built by our courageous choice. Our first reading today is This Ain't No Country Club by Nathan Walker, which is an excerpt from Greater Workages. There's no time to be spinning around ourselves saying, we're so small, we're a minority religion. No, the real problem is when we diminish our institutional self-worth by trying to be a country club religion. Who else here is tired of being internally focused and preoccupied with matters irrelevant? Coffee and his curtains crooked, and can you believe he wore that? Or do you know what she said that she would do, and that he said he would do but didn't do? And where's my Splenda? Preoccupation with idle chatter, kind of self-poisoning. We should excommunicate such petty banter. It's time that we become part of a progressive, visionary path that liberates future generations from the theological labyrinth of despair. It is time that we have the courage to transform this social club into a collective force of justice. Because we ain't no country club. We ain't no intellectual secret society, and we ain't no gaze and hum diddy-dum cult. We are an intentionally diverse community. We are a group of people who seek to lead meaningful lives, to love one another without prejudice, and to build a just and sustainable world. Let's inject this mission into our DNA, and once and for all, get out of the committees and into the streets.
Welcome to our conference. I'm so grateful to see so many faces and so many people joining us also by Zoom. My name is Mike Gilley with the Chicago Area UU Council. I use the pronouns he and him, and I am here as one of the representatives involved with organizing our event today. And I'm joined by, you've heard from Don Parker already, and we have Irene Raven that's joining in person. She's standing up, and Karen Brooker here at a PC. They were the main people helping to develop the program that we have today. And we are joined by Reverend Marcus Fogliano from the UUA, a project manager that's been involved with the whole development of the Article 2 Study Commission, and other work that they'll be able to speak with you about. And we also have panelists. Reverend Eileen Wiviott from the Unitarian Church of Evanston, and Dr. Mary Lamb Shelden, who's here as a religious educator from Countryside Church. In terms of the agenda, most of you have a handout. Those of you on Zoom, I apologize. I didn't have a way to drop the document into the Zoom chat, but we will send that over. I'll make a copy and paste after I get off the lectern here. We're going to start off with the keynote presentation that Reverend Marcus Fogliano will be involved with, and then we'll invite our panelists and Marcus to the table where we can then end. I'll moderate some questions, Q&A, based on questions that we had created and some that have been submitted to us already. And then we'll be monitoring the chat line for people that are in Zoom who might want to ask some additional questions, and of course people that are here live will have an opportunity to have an open microphone. And we'll be going until about 11:30, where we'll then break and have a brown bag lunch hopefully you've brought a lunch or can enjoy some of the snacks that we set up on the tables in our meeting hall. And following that, at 12:45, we will have breakout group sessions. So we'll reconvene, and we have 3 different breakout groups that we thought we'd conduct today based on different kind of focuses that people have in the work that they do within their congregations. And so specifically, people that are interested in board-related topics, communications within a congregation, in denominational affairs. That is one of the breakout groups. A second breakout group will be focused on religious education, both adult and children's religious education, and for that matter, for membership, because people who are learning about Unitarian Universalism and the membership classes we have could be affected by what we say we're going to be doing with Article 2. And lastly, a third breakout group for social justice that will be led by Reverend Scot Giles. So with that, I would like to welcome Reverend Marcus Fogliano. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. So excited to be with you all. I got this invitation when I was still living in Chicago, and I moved back to Peoria, Illinois, just at the beginning of this month. So I'm no longer technically a part of the community, but still here in the state of Illinois, and I'm excited to be here with you all. I bring with me greetings from my home congregation, the Universalist Unitarian Church of Peoria, as well as greetings from the Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, president of the UUA, and the over 200 UUA staff across the country that serve our faith at the international and national level. I'd like to start today with a centering. I invite you all to take a moment to find your center. This centering is by Linda J. Hootie, and it's called Centering. Enter with me that still place within, the center where we find not only our inmost selves, but also our connection to the furthest reaches of our universe. Here we confront our aspirations and our failings. Though we seek always for our lives to be full of goodness, we sometimes lack courage to right the injustices that confront us. Though we seek always to be generous, sometimes our fears cause us to be greedy. Though we seek always to walk the moral high ground, sometimes we judge others too quickly and too harshly. Though we seek always to understand the larger mysteries, sometimes doubt causes us to lose faith in our purpose. Here in this space made sacred by our shared lives and our shared yearnings, may we find new courage, new generosity of spirit, forgiveness given and received, and rededication to the higher purpose of our lives. Thank you. So this morning, I'm going to share with you all a journey that I've been on, a journey around both my personal journey and a journey of the Unitarian Universalist faith, a journey of finding our center, of finding our purpose. Both my purpose in serving our faith at large, and that serving, helping us find that center that calls us together, that common purpose that our congregations share. So in doing that, I'm going to share a little bit about myself. You may wonder who I am, why I'm here. My name is Reverend Marcus Fogliano. I am wearing a black skirt with white floral print, a maroon clerical collar shirt, and a black cardigan. As I said, I'm from Peoria, Illinois, and I serve as the project manager to the Office of the President of the Unitarian Universalist Association. But that's not where my journey started. My journey started as a 5-year-old Jehovah's Witness who was super excited about my call to institutional ministry. I watched this video and was so enthusiastic to see the wonderful work that the brothers and sisters did at the national and international offices and around the world, and I knew that's what I wanted to do. I started at that young age towards my ministry of serving the denomination, and in doing so became an ordained minister at the young age of 13. In that path, joining and supporting the establishment of an American Sign Language congregation for deaf individuals in the Central Illinois community. However, you may notice that I'm here. How did I get to this place from that calling at 5 years old to work at the National Office of Jehovah's Witnesses? Well, they're not too excited or accepting of queer folks. So at the age of 19, I was disfellowshipped from that faith tradition, and eventually at that point lost my sense of purpose. I had this purpose when I was 5, where I was going to go. I had a center. Now I'm in this point where the world around me has changed, the community around me has changed, my possibilities that are open to me have closed, and I have to reevaluate. What is my center? What is still there that has maintained and continued? I did find new purpose at that point. I found purpose in supporting LGBT people around the state of Illinois. I worked for Equality Illinois and the Illinois Safe Schools Alliance, started an organization called Peoria Proud to advocate for LGBT issues in the Peoria metropolitan area. Through that, I ended up finding Unitarian Universalism. In Bloomington, Normal, the Unitarian Universalist Church in Bloomington, Normal, I was invited to my first service at a UU church titled, Your Place in the LGBT Community. What a welcome. Going to that service, I was immediately felt welcome and felt my center and purpose shifting. I found a new home, a new faith. Joining the UU church, I got to meet individuals throughout the state and started meeting individuals nationally. My associate minister invited me to attend General Assembly in 2016 for the first time as a delegate for my congregation. This is where I start to interact with our journey as a collective in determining what our shared center, our shared purpose is as Unitarian Universalist congregations. So how does my story and our Unitarian Universalist and Unitarian and Universalist journeys kind of match? How are they similar? We live in a world that is constantly changing. We have new opportunities that open and new opportunities that close, new learnings that we come to know. And in doing so, we need to relocate our center with each generation. What is our purpose? What are these values that we as Unitarian Universalist congregations share? How do we find community as Unitarian Universalists? As Unitarians in a national organization that at one point was made up of individuals and not congregations, or as Universalists who met as state conventions and had less of a national presence, or as Unitarian Universalists with our association at the international level, or here at the Chicago Area Unitarian Universalist Council. We have these ways that we find community of our fellow Unitarian Universalists. And within each of these communities, we set our purpose and our shared values. You saw a little bit in the video earlier about some of the past statements of faith, some of these values that we've shared as Unitarians and Universalists over the years. And I have some additional information from the Tapestry of Faith curriculum that I'd like to share with you all. So Universalists had their first kind of meeting in 1785. A group of churches said, maybe we should start talking about how we grow as Universalists. How do we grow our faith? 5 years later, the official establishment of the Universalist denomination took place at the Philadelphia Convening of Universalists in 1790. At that meeting, the Universalists established the rules of faith and a plan of the church for government. The plan of the church government established autonomy of congregations on matters of faith and practice. And the rules of faith shared theological grounding and understanding based on Christian scriptures and dedicated to their lives to good works through belief in the Holy Trinity and universal salvation. In 1803, another group of Universalists in New England met and established the Winchester profession. It was a lot less theologically defined, while maintaining a belief in Christian scripture and the Holy Trinity, and recommitting to a life of good works and universal salvation. It did not pass quite that easily. There were a lot of questions about this statement at that time as to whether it was even acceptable to establish a statement of beliefs as Universalists, if that might exclude individuals. Some thought it was important to distinguish Universalists from other Christians in that age, and others thought it would limit personal conscience, if even as broad as that they considered that statement at the time were to pass. So they added a liberty clause. I'm going to share with you that profession now. It also has articles. Gotta love bylaws. Article 1, we believe that the Holy Scriptures of the Old and New Testament contain a revelation of the character of God and of the duty, interests, and final destination of mankind. Article 2, we believe that there is one God, whose nature is love, revealed in one Lord Jesus Christ, and one Holy Spirit of grace, who will finally restore the whole family of mankind to holiness and happiness. Article 3, we believe that holiness and true happiness are inseparably connected, and that believers ought to be careful to maintain order and practice good works, for these things are good and profitable unto man. As we believe these to be true, which deeply concern the honor of the divine character and the interest of man, we do hereby declare that we continue to consider ourselves and our societies and fellowship a denomination of Christianity, distinct and separate from those who do not approve the whole of the profession of belief as expressed in these 3 above articles. Yet, while we as an association adopt a general profession of belief and plan of church government, we leave it to the several churches and societies, or to the smaller associations of churches, if such should be formed, within the limits of our general association, to continue to adopt within themselves such more particular articles of faith or modes of discipline as may appear to them best under their practical circumstances, provided they do not disagree with our general profession and plan. So, after the profession in Chicago, oddly enough, the Boston Declaration was established. Why they named it Boston when they met in Chicago, I'm not quite sure, but that was in 1899. It furthered the statement of faith adopted by the Universalist General Conference, and it was known to reaffirm the strong foundation of Christianity while maintaining room for individual conscience. So from the very beginning, Universalists held this belief in individual conscience and the independence of congregations. They established a bond of fellowship in 1935 that broadened their theological beliefs and reflected the social gospel at the time that called on universalism to establish a social action within our society. It called for social conscious forms of religion that would apply the teachings of Jesus to the problems of the day, such as poverty, injustice, wars, and poor education. Unitarians, on the other hand, also had established these systems of governance, but they did not have these statements of shared faith established as the Universalists did. They did establish congregational polity in 1684 with the Cambridge Platform. A portion of the Cambridge Platform states that polity or church government or discipline is nothing else but that form in order that is to be observed in the Church of Christ upon earth, both in the constitution of it and all the administration that there are to be performed. Again, a very Bible-centric, Jesus-focused covenant between the congregations of the Unitarians. In 1853, the Office of the American Unitarian Association did set forth a statement of their beliefs. This was established by the officers of the association. At that point, the American Unitarian Association was made up of individual members and not congregations. So it was not wholly reflective of Unitarians broadly, but more reflective of that specific group of officers that's established that set of beliefs. But in setting their beliefs, they established a difference between themselves and Orthodox Christianity and against the criticism of radicalism within Unitarianism. And they also reaffirmed their Christian beliefs. 12 years later, in 1865, the National Conference of Unitarian Churches, the first organization of Unitarian congregations, established a statement of purpose that set out unmistakably that they had a Christian vision. William Channing Gannett shared things most commonly believed today among us in 1887 at the Western Unitarian Conference. This statement was widely accepted, but was never actually adopted as a statement of the Unitarians. I will share with you now the things most commonly believed among us in 1887. The Western Conference has neither the wish nor the right to bind a single member by declaration concerning fellowship or doctrine, yet it thinks some particular good may be done by setting forth in simple words things most commonly believed among us. The statement being always open to restatement and to be regarded only as thoughts of the majority. All names that divide religion are to us of little consequence compared with religion itself. Whoever loves truth and lives the good is, in broad sense, of our religious fellowship. Whoever loves the one and lives the other better than ourselves is our teacher, whether church or age he may belong to. The general faith is hinted well in words which several of our churches have adopted for their covenant. In the freedom of the truth and in the spirit of Jesus Christ, we unite for the worship of God and service of man. It is hinted in such words that as Unitarianism is a religion of love to God and love to man, because we have no creed which we impose as a condition of fellowship, specific statements of belief among us, always somewhat differing, always largely agreeing, one such we offer here. We believe that to love the good and to live the good is the supreme thing in religion. We hold reason and conscience to be final authorities in matters of religious belief. We honor the Bible and all inspiring scripture, old and new. We revere Jesus and all holy souls that have taught men truth and righteousness and love as prophets of religion. We believe in the growing nobility of man. We trust the unfolding of the universe as beautiful, beneficial, unchanging order. To know this order is truth, to obey it is right and liberty and stronger life. We believe that good and evil inevitably carry their own recompense. No good thing being failure, and no evil thing success. That heaven and hell are states of being, that no evil can befall the good man in either life or death, that all things work together for the victory of God. We believe that we ought to join hands and work to make the good things better and the worse good, counting nothing good as self that is not good for all. We believe that this self-forgetting, loyal life awakes in man the sense of union here and now with things eternal, the sense of deathlessness, and this sense is to us an earnest of the life to come. We worship one in all, that life when sun and stars derive their orbits and the soul of man, it ought that light which lightens every man that cometh into the world, giving us power to become the sons of God, the love with which our souls commune. In that statement, there's a lot about Jesus, a lot about God, a lot of things that we don't quite translate into our faith today, but there are still cores and purposes that have continued through into Unitarian Universalism. Some of these show up in the 1961 merger of the Unitarian and Universalist Church. At that point, what we now know today as Article 2, Principles and Purposes, it was known as Article 2, Purposes and Objectives. In that section, it had only 6 objectives. Our congregations at that point dedicated themselves, not covenanted, but dedicated themselves in accordance with the purposes of the association to the principles of a free faith and united to seek these objectives. The first being to strengthen one another in a free and disciplined search for truth as the foundation of our religious fellowship. Our second was to cherish and spread the universal truth taught by the great prophets and teachers of humanity in every age and tradition, summarized in the Judeo-Christian heritages as love to God and love to man. To affirm, defend, and promote the supreme worth of every human personality, the dignity of man, and the use of the democratic process in human relationships. To implement our vision of one world by striving for a world community founded on ideals of brotherhood, justice, and peace. To serve the needs of member churches and fellowships, to organize new churches and fellowships, and to extend the strength of liberal religion. And lastly, to encourage cooperation with men of goodwill and in every land. One of the things that almost stopped the merger was one word, a debate between the use of "the" and the use of "our." Is it the Judeo-Christian or is it our Judeo-Christian heritage? It's funny, the story. This debate actually showed up with the Article 2 Study Commission. Is it the Unitarian Universalist heritages or our Unitarian Universalist heritages? We went with "our" because they are definitely "our," but there were suggestions that we might change that. One of the other notes from the purposes and objectives was the inherent sexism in brotherhood and men. In 1885, when the Principles and Purposes Commission was established, it was actually the result of earlier actions in 1977 with the Women and Religion resolution that was passed by the General Assembly. That resolution established a Women and Religions Committee that conducted a sexism audit of the association and its member congregations and affiliate organizations, very similar to the racism audit that was conducted by the Commission on Institutional Change. In 1979, the first Continental Women and Religions Conference was held with district leaders in Grayville, Ohio. And at that point, the recommendations for the amendments to Article 2 to establish the principles and purposes was put forward. That created a Principles and Purposes Task Force Committee that eventually brought those recommendations to the General Assembly and were passed. In 2005, the Commission on Appraisal conducted one of their studies. It was entitled Engaging Our Theological Diversity. In that report, they looked at what are the common beliefs that are shared amongst Unitarian Universalists, what are our sources of inspiration, what are our sources of theology. And in so doing, they made some recommendations and some realizations. One, that we don't really have a shared theology. That's what they said, but they also said that one thing that we do share is a reverence for the word love. Love might be that shared theology. The Commission on Appraisal, noting that the UUA had not conducted its 15-year requirement for a study of Article 2, then took on that study following the release of their report and put forward a recommendation for amendments in 2009. In 2009, there was not an amendment process for the proposal from the Article 2 Study Commission. That led to it not passing. It failed by about a dozen votes to be placed on the agenda in 2010 for final adoption, which leads up to our new process for Article 2, picking up from where the Commission on Appraisal left off. This concept of love as our center for Unitarian Universalists. In 2016 is when the process for changing Article 2 really started up again. We amended Article 2, the second source, in 2016 to change it from the prophetic words and deeds of men and women to the prophetic words and deeds of people. The way that the bylaws works for amending Article 2 is you can take a vote to approve a change, and if that vote is approved, you can take another vote to dispense with the study. Basically, if you say, yes, we want to change this, that automatically triggers a study of Article 2, unless you take another vote and say, we don't need the study. We have enough support at this General Assembly to adopt this change to Article 2, and that is what happened in 2016 with the second source. In 2017, there was movement to amend the first principle from the inherent worth and dignity of all people to the inherent worth and dignity of all beings. This was a movement that was encouraged by individuals who are seeking to acknowledge the sacredness of animals and their inherent worth and dignity. That year also, the grassroots movement for the adoption of an eighth principle that would establish a commitment within our principles to anti-racism and anti-oppression was also brought forward at that General Assembly. It was unlikely that either of those were going to pass at that General Assembly, or even just to be considered, let alone to be approved without a study. So the Board of Trustees at that point, noting that another 15 years had passed since the last study, informed the General Assembly that they would appoint an Article 2 study commission. In 2018 and 2019, the Board of Trustees conducted general conference sessions at General Assembly, where they engaged congregational delegates in conversations about the principles and the mission of the association to garner input for establishing the charge for the Commission on the Article 2 Study Commission. In 2020, that commission was appointed and the charge was given to the commission. Some of the points that the commission likes to uplift from their charge is that they were The board charges this commission to root its work in love as the principal guide of its work, attending particularly to the ways that we and our root traditions have understood and articulated love, and how we have acted out of love. The commission is charged with reviewing all sections of Article 2 and are free to revise, replace, restructure, and them as needed to meet the objectives stated above. There is nothing sacred about the number of principles or sources, nor their specific wording, nor the way that Article 2 is laid out. We encourage creativity. And creative the commission was. If you have seen the revisions to Article 2, it is significant change from the principles. The Article 2 Study Commission started off their process in discernment and really diving into their charge, understanding what their charge is. Anything that's made by a group, made by a committee is going to have contradictions. It needs to be poetic, but it needs to be plain language. There are different things that the commissions had to really sift through the charge to fully understand it. And they also needed to fully understand the history and the context of Article 2. The commission found, in having conversations, interviews, feedback sessions in the early stages of the commission, they learned that there are different ways that people understand Article 2 to manifest itself in our UUA. Technically, it is in the bylaws. It is about the purpose of the association, the Unitarian Universalist Association, why we associate as individuals, not as individuals, as congregations. For many, the principles have become a personal reflection, something that they hold onto individually as their own individual creed. Not a creed of the association, but something that they find value in. For others, they use the principles for evangelical purposes. How do you share what Unitarian Universalism is to a stranger? Here's these 7 things. It's written down, it's very simple, and that's not technically their purpose in the UUA bylaws. So the Article 2 Study Commission went through this process of understanding what is the purpose of Article 2, what people need Article 2 to be, and from that they developed some questions in some areas to engage people in 4 different specific areas: mission, values, covenant, and inspirations. So the principles for many people expressed a shared ethic that implies a certain theology, one that values the individual growth and the natural world and diversity, but it does not name these values explicitly, but it does, nor does it name many other values that we as Unitarians share, Unitarian Universalists share. We often talk about our UU values, but we've never actually named them specifically. So after the Article 2 Study Commission completed, they developed congregational discussion resources in their first year and engaged with affiliate organizations. They then sent out various surveys, a total of 29 surveys that generated over 10,000, nearly 11,000 responses, and included 45 different feedback sessions with over 4,600 participants. And from those conversations about our mission, our values, our covenant, and our inspirations, the Article 2 Study Commission proposed these 7 touchstone values, these single words that we can call back to in understanding what our shared values, our shared center of Unitarian Universalist congregations are. These 7 words were love, generosity, equity, justice, transformation, interdependence, and pluralism. The Commission also addressed inspirations. For many, the inspiration, the sources that are in Article 2 currently are limited. There's no way to fully express all of the sources of wisdom and inspiration that Unitarian Universalists draw from in a list. So the Commission asks instead, how do we find our sources of inspiration? How do we engage with them ethically? And that's that question that they ask is how they presented the inspiration section of their Article 2 recommendations. The inclusion clause of Article 2 is the most recent addition to Article 2. The Article 2 Study Commission thought it still largely was in line with the current thinking and the future needs of our association, so they did very little adjustments to the inclusion clause. But the freedom of belief clause in Article 2, the current freedom of belief clause, it says that we aren't allowed to establish creeds. The number of people that responded that they thought that it meant that we could establish creeds was a lot, because it was very unclear, very jargony, very legalese. So they've restated the freedom of belief clause to be more simple and direct, that maintains the commitment that has existed since the 1700s to congregational polity and individual conscience. So, to wrap up my part, I'm going to share now the actual revisions that are presented by the Article 2 Study Commission. Section C 2.1, Purposes. The Unitarian Universalist Association will devote its resources to and use its organizational powers for religious, educational, and humanitarian purposes. Its primary purposes are to assist congregations in their vital ministries, support and train leaders, both lay and professional, to foster lifelong faith formation, to heal historic injustices, and to advance our Unitarian Universalist values in the world. The purpose of the Unitarian Universalist Association is to actively engage its members in the transformation of the world through liberating love. Section C 2.2, Values and Covenant. As Unitarian Universalists, we covenant congregation to congregation and through our association to support and assist one another in our ministries. We draw from our heritages of freedom, reason, hope, and courage, building on the foundation of love. Love is the power that holds us together and is at the center of our shared values. We are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Are inseparable from one another. These shared values are. There's an image that the Commission wants included in the bylaws. We have technology, that can happen. The image is a chalice at the center with love overlaid on the flame. Around the chalice is a flower shape with arms outstretched, circling each of the values. The values are independence, orange, equity, red, transformation, purple, pluralism, blue, generosity, teal, and justice, yellow. Interdependence. We honor the interdependent web of all existence. We covenant to cherish Earth and all beings by creating and nurturing relationships of care and respect. With humility and reverence, we acknowledge our place in the great web of life, and we work to repair harm and damaged relationships. Pluralism. We celebrate that we are all sacred beings, diverse in culture, experience, and theology. We covenant to learn from one another in our free and responsible search for truth and meaning. We embrace our differences and commonalities with love, curiosity, and respect. Justice. We work to be diverse, multicultural, beloved communities where all thrive. We covenant to dismantle racism and all forms of systemic oppression. We support the use of inclusive democratic processes to make decisions. Transformation. We adapt to the changing world. We covenant to collectively transform and grow spiritually and ethically. Openness to change is fundamental to our Unitarian and Universalist heritages, never complete, never perfect. Generosity. We cultivate a spirit of gratitude and hope. We covenant to freely and compassionately share our faith, presence, and resources. Our generosity connects us to one another in relationships of interdependence and mutuality. Equity. We declare that every person has the right to flourish with inherent worth and dignity, with inherent dignity and worthiness. Sorry, had the old language stuck in my head. We covenant to use our time, wisdom, attention, and money to build and sustain fully accessible, inclusive communities. Section C 2.3, Inspirations. As Unitarian Universalists, we use and are inspired by sacred and secular understandings that help us to live into our values. We respect the histories, contexts, and cultures in which they were created and are currently practiced. These sources ground us and sustain us in ordinary, difficult, and joyous times. Grateful for the religious ancestries we inherit and the diversity which enriches our faith, we are called to ever deepen and expand our wisdom. Section C 2.4, Inclusion. Systems of power, privilege, and oppression have traditionally created barriers for persons and groups with particular identities, ages, abilities, and histories. We pledge to replace such barriers with ever-widening circles of solidarity and mutual respect. We strive to be an association of congregations that truly welcome all persons who share our values. We commit to being an association of congregations that empower and enhance everyone's participation, especially those with historically marginalized identities. Section C 2.5, Freedom of Belief. Congregational freedom and the individual's right to conscience are central to our Unitarian Universalist heritage. Congregations may establish statements of purpose, covenant, and bond of union, so long as they do not require the members adhere to a particular creed. This is the revisions proposed by the Article 2 Study Commission. They will be put on the agenda for this General Assembly. We highly encourage congregations to send all their allotted delegates to this General Assembly and start having conversations about this proposal now. Delegates will have an opportunity to offer amendments. The Board of Trustees is still in conversation with legal counsel because the revisions to the bylaws about how to change Article 2 are very hazy, very confusing, very prescriptive in how the process has to happen, and it's not necessarily the most accessible and most inclusive way. So the Board of Trustees is looking for ways to allow congregations to submit amendments earlier, to allow spaces for amendment workshops for folks that are interested in amending particular parts, to meet, have conversations, to coordinate on the amendments that they would like. We could have an amendment for every single word that's in this, and there is not enough time at General Assembly. So the bylaws require that the chairs of the Article 2 Study Commission, the co-moderators, and the parliamentarian for General Assembly to prioritize the amendments that will come up at General Assembly as time allows. So the board is hoping to have these workshops to have amendments submitted before the mini assembly at General Assembly, and any amendments that are submitted at General Assembly will be at the mini assembly will have less priority than the ones that have congregational endorsement or that have been submitted before General Assembly for people to discuss. And that's all still in the works, has not been finalized, formalized, but that's what was presented at the board meeting last Friday as their consideration of how the amendment process will work. So thank you for having me here, and I'm looking forward to answering questions. think we're going to bring up the rest of the folks.
Greetings to our panelists. And Mary, if you want to reference, if you want me to bring up an image at some point, you can signal me to do that.
Great. Thank you. Is this working? Yeah. Excellent.
All right.
As I said, I was ordained at 13, so I sweat like a preacher.
Thank you so much for that history. That is really valuable. It's something that I can say I hadn't heard told quite the way that you told it, giving really important context, especially in light of what's happening with Article 2. So thank you for grounding us and providing a framework for being able to engage in some discussion and have some understanding and appreciation for why this needs to be a living thing. It is not cast in stone. Okay. So with that, before we open it up to the audience and to people who would be joining from Zoom, who might text or send a chat message to send a question that Karen Brooker will be monitoring, I've got some questions for each of our panelists, and I'll start off with you, Reverend Marcus. So this is the softball question. We start easy and we work our way. How does your background and experience as an ordained Jehovah's Witness inform your work on the UUA?
So it's kind of...
We need a microphone.
It's kind of interesting. So as every space that I go into that's a UU space, I typically run into former Jehovah's Witnesses. I've really started to look into some of the history of the foundation of the Bible students, which was the original name of Jehovah's Witnesses. There's actually the first split between Jehovah's Witnesses and the Bible students. The largest other Bible student organization is based in Chicago. I found out that Pastor Charles Taze Russell, who was the founder, specifically critiqued Unitarians and Universalism in positive ways. Like building upon. So Unitarians and Jehovah's Witnesses are technically the largest Unitarian Universalist Christian denomination in the world. So there's a lot of our history, our old theology as Christian Unitarians and Christian Universalists are still maintained by Jehovah's Witnesses. So it's interesting working at the UUA because there's a lot of anxiety around leadership in UU spaces, and a lot of concern about power within those relationships. And I have a lot of empathy for it because I can see how Charles Taze Russell was a Congregationalist Unitarian Universalist, and then Brother Rutherford became president after he died, and became a powerful president that took power from congregations, and then the board removed the president and it became a governing body, and now there's a governing body that controls everything. So I know how it can happen. so I have empathy for the anxiety, and I think that really allows me to both look at the good aspects of Jehovah's Witnesses. I really did not have concepts of classism and racism within a religious institution until I came to a UU church. But as a Jehovah's Witness, sexism and homophobia were a major issue. So I having that experience as an outsider coming into Unitarian Universalism, being able to step back and look at how their system works and how Unitarians work, what works well here, what doesn't work well here, what works well here, and what doesn't work well there, and seeing how that path from congregational autonomy and right to conscience can transform into an authoritative state. really puts me in a position of being able to be empathetic to those concerns, and also be reassuring that we're nowhere near, nor even heading in that direction. Right of conscience and congregational polity is important to Unitarian Universalists, and that includes the leaders that we elect in our democratic process.
I'm going to keep you with the microphone for a moment because I had the privilege of being able to spend time with Marcus last night, and they shared with me some things that I thought were pretty interesting that prompted me to ask a question. They were telling me about their experience at Meadville Lombard Theological School in a class involving innovation. And the Jehovah's Witnesses do something interesting that maybe you might speak a little bit about. And it informs in not just ideas of innovation that we might consider ourselves, but it should awaken us to the possibility that we're not as inclusive as we might think when the primary language we speak, or the only language we speak, is our own language.
So Lee Barker, Lev Lee Barker, former president of Meadville Lombard. I took his last class that he presented for potential students, prospective students, which was on religious leadership in a post-denominational age. And it was basically on different ways, innovative ministries that are taking place either within Unitarian Universalism or within movements outside of our space, like Soul Cycle was one of the things that we talked about. And one of them was about a congregation in Southern California that had started a satellite Spanish congregation. And I was like, that's innovative. I was like, I had a Spanish congregation in my church when I was growing up. I helped found an American Sign Language congregation when I was 15. So there's ways, I'm just thinking about this church having a ramp, which is amazingly accessible. I have never been in a Kingdom Hall that did not have a ramp. There are churches that still struggle with convincing the congregation that it is important that people that need access to the pulpit that cannot walk have a ramp to the podium. So there's, as I said, witnesses are terrible in some things, but when it comes to accessibility, language accessibility, physical accessibility, everything they print in like over 300 languages. They interpret all of their materials into 36 different sign languages, Braille, audio, visual, all of these things they produce for accessibility that I think we have the potential as Unitarian Universalists to do as the collective. That this is part of our shared values. How do we pool our resources in an association to make our message more accessible to wider audiences?
Thank you. One of our attendees asked a question when they registered. Why were things in the original Article 2 left out of the revision? And they went on to say, I'm thinking of the importance of truth in science and the use of the democratic process. And allow me to say that at the time that question came was prior to the report, the final report that came out last Friday.
Yeah, so I think I think there's a lot of misconception that the Article 2 Study Commission knew what they were going to write before they released their draft in October, which is not the case. They had a retreat in the spring where they drafted some language, and then they presented that at General Assembly. There were surveys based off that feedback that the commission then processed, and had another retreat in October to create the draft that they released for feedback in November. The Article 2 Study Commission from the conversations that they had been having around values. The conversations that they were having about values put forward those 7 words, which at that point included evolution instead of transformation, knowing specifically that it was a draft, that they were nowhere near wanting to present that to the Board of Trustees. There are some values, some principles, the right to conscience, the democratic process that didn't feel like they fit well into values, but were so inherent to Unitarian Universalism that I don't know that people, as they were giving feedback, as they were answering surveys in the beginning, included. Because democratic process is so important to us, when you ask what are our values, and you're thinking about what are our values, it might not necessarily come to the top of your mind because you expect that it's already there. So I think that that's the reason that it did not show up originally, but with the feedback that happened in the fall, it was very clear that no, that because it's so important, yes, it's in Article 3, but we want that to be stated in our values, and so that's the reason it was added.
Thank you. Reverend Eileen, Unitarian Church of Evanston, they've actually been one of the congregations in the area that has adopted the 8th principle, and maybe you can speak a little bit about that process that your congregation went through, and the fact that now with Article 2 there aren't principles, there isn't an 8th principle per se.
Yeah. Thanks for asking that question, and thanks again to Reverend Fogliano for your presentation. Was really helpful, enlightening for me too, and I just appreciate so much the work of the commission. I think it's been a very thoughtful and inclusive process. Yes, our congregation, I think there's maybe 400 or so that have adopted either congregations or faith communities or organizations that have adopted the 8th principle. And I want to say that the work of anti-racism and anti-oppression and that commitment is not a linear process. And it doesn't fit well into, this is the first thing you do, and this is the second thing you do, and this is the third thing you do. It is an ever, I think of it as ever widening and intersecting circles, and it is fundamentally relational and transformational work rather than transactional or linear work. And so the fact that we went through the process of adopting the 8th principle as a congregation was good and important and transformational work for our congregation. It has made explicit our commitment and demanded that we ask and answer the question over and over again, and what are we doing to be accountable on this journey towards anti-racism and anti-oppression? Some of the things that have followed since then is that we went through a similar process. And so to get to that place of adopting it, we had a series of conversations, educational opportunities, feedback sessions, gathering input from folks so that when it came to the time to actually adopt it, it was, pretty well, almost a unanimous approval to do it because people understood what this was about. Since then, we've adopted a resolution to support reparations locally and nationally, and to give the minister, me, the ability to speak to, on behalf of the congregation, that commitment publicly, so that I don't have to go to the congregation every time there's a statement of a position that is explicitly an anti-racist, anti-oppressive statement, I don't have to go to the congregation to get approval. It's just understood that this is inherent to who we are. So, I think that that language of the eighth principle is interwoven into this current draft. And so it's all been a helpful process for us to go through to be able to recognize where that language, that accountability, justice, equity, interdependence, pluralism, all of those things I think are interwoven into the statement that make that's how the eighth principle I think shows up.
Is there any other embellishment that you didn't already cover having to do with what other congregations who have adopted this, I think the question was, how have congregations that have adopted the eighth principle and are diving deeper into anti-racism and anti-oppression work, thinking about the Article 2 proposed revisions? Is there any other?
I can't really speak to other congregations. I just, I think that we've been doing a lot of work with the Article 2 to have these conversations among our congregation. I've preached about it a lot. I am not hearing any resistance or sort of like, well, where's the eighth principle? Though it is, it's understandably confusing. I think there's a lot of congregations that don't really understand the process to the level that you explained it, right? It's just a hard thing for us to wrap our heads around, but I think it's central for us to remember as a tradition that we are inherently transforming, progressive. Revelation is not sealed, and that is sort of what makes us. That is fundamentally who we are as Unitarian Universalists, is that we are continuing, it is a journey to be a Unitarian Universalist and to continually discern what it means to be anti-racist and anti-oppressive as a Unitarian Universalist. So, I guess I'm not hearing much other than from the conversations that we've had that I participated on Zoom, which are across the country, of people kind of, that question has come up, but I think it's pretty easily answered, that the language is there.
I realize that I neglected to actually name who the commissioners are. The Eighth Principle Project, it's a grassroots movement. I think there has been some confusion, some misinformation about the UUA being the driver of that process. That has been a independent congregational level process. When it came up at General Assembly, that's when the board said, okay, we need to initiate a study of Article 2 to consider this. And these other things that have also come up around Article 2 over the years. But Paula Cole-Jones, who is one of the co-authors of the Eighth Principle, is actually a member of the Article 2 Study Commission. So it was included in the charge to the commission that they consider the Eighth Principle. It was then reaffirmed by the General Assembly in 2021 by resolution saying that the General Assembly wanted anti-oppression, anti-racism language placed in Article 2. So it has been, thankfully, because of that continuity with Paula Cole-Jones on the commission, it has somewhat alleviated well, we just did this at our congregation. Why is this something different? But the rest of the commission, Reverend Cheryl M. Walker, she is they're former president of the UUMA, UU Ministers Association. Paula Cole-Jones, Dr. Rob Spurko is an English professor in Tennessee. Sorry, I keep getting away. Dr. Rob Spurko is an English professor and former board president of his local congregation in Tennessee. We have former Commissioner Becky Brooks, who's a religious educator. She stepped down, I believe, in August, just for other things happening in her life. Paula. Satya Mandani, who was appointed as a youth commissioner, and this process has been going on so long that she's now a freshman in college and no longer a youth, as well as Maya Waller, who is also now a sophomore in college, but she was also a youth commissioner. So I think that was, yeah, that's all. So minister, religious educator, 2 lay leaders, and 2 youth made up the commission.
And speaking of youth, our children have a stake, in the revisions to Article 2 as well. And as Article 2 changes go through the process at General Assembly, what will the impact be on religious education programming, Dr. Mary?
Hi. Okay, good. I'm going to prop my elbow up. I'm Mary Shelden. I'm Director of Lifespan Religious Education here at Countryside. My pronouns are she, her. I'm wearing black with a pumpkin spice sweater that I declare to still be seasonal because pumpkins are a winter vegetable, winter squash. I'm very glad that Reverend Marcus shared that there were youth who became young adults on the commission. I think that's been really important to the process of including young voices, who I just want to remind us all have often been in deeper study for longer about what Unitarian Universalism is than many of our adult and elder members who come to us from other traditions. So just a reminder that that's crucial. And I think the impact will be various, and it will vary widely according to what congregation you're in and what process that congregation is in relationally, and each religious educator and those teaching teams in conversation with the minister and religious education councils, it's gonna vary widely how it impacts our congregations. And actually, Jeff, if you could put up if there's a rainbow image there that you could put up for us.
It's me.
The other one, is there a second? Okay, good.
I got it.
All right, Mike's got it, thanks.
Eventually.
It's coming. So, this is the rainbow path. I took a photo of it this morning in our classrooms. It's based on the 7 principles for each color of the rainbow, Roy G. Biv, right? This has been maybe not this specific image, but this kind of image has been in wide circulation in our congregations for a long time. And I love it. And our children, come to understand our principles in this way. And there's a way in which this rainbow image makes it feel like the principles are organic, right? And fundamental and obvious and natural. And that's been helpful in a way in terms of creating this interdependent web of life philosophy among our children. And I think there's also a danger in that, right? In the sense that rainbows are sort of eternal and unchanging, right? Except they're not really. Even rainbows are not eternal and unchanging. And our principles are likewise not eternal and unchanging. And so I'm really glad that the commission asked for that image to be put into the draft document for our consideration, because I think it's important for us to begin to picture new images. And you could bring that values flower back up if you would, Mike. One of the youth commissioners at the presentation to the UUA board of the draft talked about how she had grown up with the rainbow path and how it was cherished by her and beloved, but that in conversation with young people, she had begun to see that that this new set of values would be for them what the rainbow path had been for her, something cherished, something that can inform her faith throughout her life, and that we don't need to lose the principles, right? Those can stay with us for as long as we need and want them, for as long as they're useful, and the values can be added and, you know, perhaps interchanged over time.
Let me turn the question away from the kids for a while and get back to some general question that any of you might answer. Assuming that the new Article 2 language is adopted in 2024, what are some specific ways you envision that its adoption will help lead to a more welcoming denomination and more welcoming congregations?
I can give this a shot, I guess. I think that I think when you were talking about it, Reverend Fogliano, about how the 7 principles were never meant to be here's a list of what we are and who we are, right? I think there is sort of a danger of us getting too attached to a specific what has been called least common denominator sort of ideas, right? Like that there's been a lot of conversation about that for a long time about, you know, is that it? You know, like, is that as good as we can do? I love the principles. I think they're beautiful. I think they're poetic. And I think that there is something about, you know, a principle that feels like it's a stake in the sand of, you know, an idealism that that perhaps isn't as useful as sort of an invitational idea of values that we are aspiring to align ourselves around. You know, I've been in conversations, some of the Zoom conversations where people felt very strongly about the word principles versus values. I don't quite get that, like what the power of that difference is, but I think it is helpful to have the. I've also heard people say, like, well, the statements are too long and it's too hard to remember, and I'm like, you know, are the 7 principles super easy to remember? Like, how many of you like could recite those? You know, I just love the idea that there's these one-word statements that, you know, we could easily kind of commit to memory, right? And then there's a description of each and an action that goes with each. This is what we mean by love. This is what we mean by interdependence. And here's how we're going to commit to living those more fully. I think that's a much more powerful statement in some ways. And I think it's also important, I love the fact that love is at the center. And I think it's important for us to understand that what we're talking about is not a squishy kind of love. You know, I think of the quote by Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King that is my favorite quote, that power without love is reckless and abusive, and love without power is sentimental and anemic. And power at its best is justice implementing the demands of love. And justice at its best is power correcting everything that stands against love. I think I got that right. Anyway.
That's impressive.
I think it's really important for us when we're having these conversations to talk about and know what we mean by love, and know what we mean by creating the beloved community. What does that mean? And that's going to be an ongoing discovery and conversation for us to be having. And I think this empowers us to do that more fully.
I just want to add on to that part at the end about this is something that we're going to have conversations. There's going to be sermons for years about digesting what each of these values means for each congregation. There's kind of So in the whole process, there's contradictions between what people are telling the commission. We are very, because of our pluralism in so many ways, we don't agree on a whole lot. And I think that it is important that there is some vagueness and ambiguity in this presentation, because it's not necessarily the position of the UUA to tell you how to define these things. How you define love, how you define generosity are based on our individual conscience. It's also based on our congregations. So these are values that broadly we all share. How we define them may be different, but it's something that we will have at least another 15 years to talk about what they mean to us. And that also, hopefully, another year for congregations to really study whatever amendments are adapted to this presentation. If it's this revision as amended or unamended is approved by 50% of the vote at this General Assembly, it does not approve it. It just puts it on the General Assembly next year for a 2/3 majority approval. So it just gives us a year to sit with it, to talk about it, to study it.
If you have anything to add, Mary, you may, or I'll go to the next question. Okay. The revised values and covenant says we are accountable to one another for doing the work of living our shared values through the spiritual discipline of love. Looking at our churches both as communities and as organizations connected to one another, how might we expect to see this concept of accountability applied?
I just want to say that, so as Reverend Eileen was saying, the values flower represents these one words, but for each of those words there's an explanation and then there's a statement of engagement. And that's where I think the 8th principle ends up, is in those statements of engagement for each of the values. So, I don't know, that's my take. Repeat the question, would you?
But the question relates to accountability. How are we gonna, the words accountability are in there.
Yeah.
So how are we going to hold each other and our congregations
How? The
accountable?
how. Good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure I have that answer ready, so I'll hand off the mic.
I could probably tell you how it's not going to happen. The UUA is not. I could probably tell you how it's not going to happen. The UUA is not appointing an audit committee to come into your congregation and sit down and go through all of your stuff and say what you're not doing and what you are doing. We don't have the time or the resources or the interest to tell each individual congregation, which are over 1,000, what they're doing wrong or what they should be doing, or a mandate. Our accountability is really, Reverend Scott's here somewhere. Reverend Scott with the UUANI Action Network for Illinois has gone through an accountability process of reaching out to organizations that work in marginalized identity rights organizations to really to be thought partners and to go to them and say, hey, what do you need help with? How can we support you? Or we're considering doing this. What are we not thinking about in the impact that it's going to have on you? The accountability is going to be local. It's going to be very much just the way our congregations engage with each other, within themselves and within the community around them. It's not an overlord association audit committee.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of fear around that word accountability, or discomfort for some, feeling like there's going to be some sort of policing or punishment involved. And I just think nothing could be further from the truth. That for me, accountability, again, it comes back to relationship, relationship, relationship. It is absolutely that. And I can I can share just an example of one of the ways that I feel like accountability that we at the Unitarian Church of Evanston are striving to live into that accountability, and the call of the 8th principle has been to respond to and engage. We have the very good fortune and the pride of being part of a community where reparations have been the first municipality in the country where reparations have actually been put into place for harm done in the African American community. And that has been just a very clear and unequivocal moral mandate, I would say, for us to be a part of that conversation, that process, and to be asking ourselves that question: what does this call us to do? What does this call us to say? And because we had signed that, we had adopted that, I'm losing the word, resolution in May of last year to support reparations locally and nationally, I was able to be a part of an interfaith group that has signed on, as clergy and faith communities, has signed on to a very explicit statement of that support. So it's not just the Unitarian Church of Evanston supports reparations, but 17 other congregations are working together and have written a statement that we've signed on to publicly to say we will support reparations with our financial commitment to the extent that we are able to do that, and each congregation has a different way of doing that. But in addition, and perhaps even more importantly, with our ongoing commitment to learning and understanding what that means, to building relationships of repair and healing, and to doing the truth-telling, the search of our own histories to determine where have we shown up in the journey of racial justice, where have we been silent and complicit. And so a team of us, including my good friend Margaret Chackley and 3 others in the congregation, we did a kind of a deep dive into our archives to talk about that and to share that with the congregation. It was really powerful for folks. And those are the kinds of, that kind of understanding and understanding of our own selves and our own history with humility and honesty will equip us as we engage in further conversations with our community siblings in our community, our interfaith siblings in the community that are also doing this work and having these explorations, so that we can have those conversations and say, you know, yeah, this is where we fell short of our ideals, and this is how we want to try to do better moving forward. It's a powerful thing to build those relationships, and again, it's as simple as that and as complicated, and it will take a lifetime to build those relationships, and it's part of us, you know, making that commitment to we're in it for a long haul to build those relationships.
I just wanted to add on to what I was saying. I just wanted to add on to what I was saying about accountability really being a local thing. There's also accountability at the associational level. We have identity groups, affiliate organizations, religious professional organizations. There are movement leaders in different justice organizations. Those are our accountability partners as well as congregations. We give reports at General Assembly, we get feedback from delegates to make sure that we're meeting the commitments that congregations make to each other through the association. We are, the UUA is the embodiment of the congregation's covenant. So what you as congregations agree to, your covenant is what we have to operate as. So you'll find that you'll find that UUA staff in this Article 2 process will be very helpful in directing you towards how to engage in the amendment process, but we stand neutral in this, as whether it passes. We're engaged in making sure the process is accessible and that people are able to give their input. It is your decision to make as congregations whether this is the covenant that you want to adopt.
Thank you for that elaboration. We did want to make time for questions that are for people here in the room, as well as for anybody via Zoom that could send questions via chat. I've got a microphone. Is there a show of hand? Okay, to Bill. If you wouldn't mind, state your name, pronouns, and congregation.
It was Bill Scowen, he, him, and I belong to this congregation here. We moved here recently from Geneva, where we were in the UUSG congregation. So my question is about the amendment process, which, you know, I have this mental picture of 1 million proposed amendments, every word, you know, thousands of people. How are you going to sort the amendments out? What's the process going to be that is going to make people feel that it was fair, that they've been heard, they own the result? I mean, this sounds like a really hard one to me.
Yes.
Good answer.
Yes. So the bylaws actually prescribe how the amendment process works. In 2009, there was not an amendment process, which is probably why it failed by 12%, because the process was done, it was in 2009. Internet was around, but it wasn't as accessible as it is now. The way the bylaws were changed after 2009 to add an amendment process required that the moderator, which there are co-moderators, and the chair of the commission, which there are co-chairs, and the parliamentarian for the General Assembly will actually prioritize the amendments. And that's what the Board of Trustees and the administration are currently talking with legal counsel about, how to do that's in line with the bylaws that makes it more accessible. So the proposal that was presented to the board on Friday, this last Friday, that they'll probably formalize in their February meeting, would include amendment workshops before General Assembly, for folks to gather, have conversations about sections of the bylaws that they want to tweak and make amendments to. What comes out of those workshops would then be put on online forums, so folks can work together to try to come to some consensus and online discussions about what should be priorities on those amendments that came out of the workshops. The presentation said that some of those online forums might turn into another amendment workshop based on what comes out of the forums. As far as what has been discussed about how to prioritize the amendments can only be brought forward at the mini assembly at General Assembly, which is not how we did mini assemblies last year, now that we're in this virtual, in-person General Assembly function. We had mini assemblies before General Assembly in the month of May and June. The bylaws say that it has to be at General Assembly for the Article 2 study process. So that's the reason for these amendment workshops, in order to prioritize the amendments that go to the General Assembly, being that the moderators, the parliamentarian and the chair of the commission prioritize those, it is likely that they are going to give priority to amendments that are sponsored by congregations or amendments that have been brought to those workshops and worked through with delegates. So if you're a delegate, you're not talking to your congregation, you show up at General Assembly and you go to the mini assembly and you put forward a amendment that you haven't talked to anybody about, it's probably not going to be prioritized on the list to get through. So priority will most likely be given to those that have been sponsored by congregations and that have been gone through this amendment workshopping process leading up to General Assembly. That process has not started. There will likely be a system developed on the UUA website for submitting amendments. But this process should be ironed out by the February General Assembly, which is probably a good thing. I think that if we start right now, today, just having received this last week, tweaking things, we haven't really sat with it to see if it's something that is a gut reaction or if it's something that is actually something that does need to change. So if this little gap between having received it and the amendments process starting is probably for the best.
Carl, go ahead, introduce yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you. I'm Carl Wolf. I'm from the Hobart, Indiana congregation, and I have a lot of thoughts. So I'm hungry. We've got. So I'll try and keep it short.
Speak close to the microphone.
I'm not sure I understand why this is happening. I think that I find that the presentation gave us some examples of the need to change covenant in the past based on uber Christian language and very salvation, and I get that, but I don't from the 16, 17, 1800s, the need to change that was good, that was presented. It's not clear to me what is arising from our current Article 2 that would necessitate a change in the articles. I find the current principles to be really aspirational and a way forward. I think they're outward looking in their, they use words such as the interdependent way of life, and they use these outward words that I don't remember off the top of my head, but look at the principles. And so I find them to be part of our look in the world, and so I find them inspiring. I find them, let's do this. We got things to do, and yet they're welcoming. And not everybody that comes to church is ready.
Carl, please direct it to be a question.
It's not a question, I have a statement.
Okay, we only have a moment left because we want to make use of the time for questions that people have.
Should I continue?
I would invite you to, during the lunch, that maybe continue to share some of your ideas, if you like, with people, and during the breakout session, that would be an opportunity to speak about that too.
I would also think that in the future, CAUUC should have a panel that is more diverse opinions on the changes. That's my other. So, thank you.
Sure, thank you. Is there anybody else that has a question? Or Jeff, get up here, Karen.
I have a question from the chat.
Who is the person?
So this is from First U, the Ganwas. Reverend Marcus said something failed in 2009 that resulted in the addition of an amendment process in the bylaws, and just asking for context, what was it that failed in 2009?
So in 2009, what failed was the Commission on Appraisal conducted a review of Article 2, and they put forward amendments to Article 2. So that failed its first vote to be put on for adoption in 2010. And that at that point, there was not an amendment process for Article 2 amendments. Article 2 revisions. It was just presented as a say yes or say no.
Thank you. I have another question from the chat. Can Marcus, and this is from Rebecca Pace, can Marcus share anything else they know about the accountability launch group that was approved at the May 2022 board meeting and the accountability design team introduced in April 2022?
I can say that I know the board is getting close to appointing the accountability launch team. That's about all that I know. That's about all that I know on that subject.
Are there any other questions? In the back? Well, thanks, Jeff.
Hi, Chuck Ruth, he, him from Unity Temple Oak Park. This is a really lengthy document in comparison to the 7 principles. And I don't think, when I think about the 7 principles, they do 2 things at least. One is to help identify for ourselves who we are, and then also to help us communicate to others what we're all about. And if we just say, I believe in justice, interdependence, equity, transformation, pluralism, generosity, and love in the flower, that communicates nothing. But this document is too extensive as a communication tool for those practical purposes I was talking about. Is there any thought to creating something? I'm not talking about changing anything in this document. I'm just talking about a way to make it easier to communicate for ourselves and others.
Absolutely. So I think, for one thing, the principles is only a section of Article 2. The whole of Article 2 is the revisions aren't all that extensively more wordy than the current Article 2. It's just 7 principles versus, it's just a segment of Article 2. So it's probably about similar length. I think that the religious educators and religious educators on the UUA staff and comms folks on UUA staff and ministers will come up with amazing things. The rainbow path that was shown up there for youth is something that after the 7 principles were established, someone was like, how do we make this accessible to youth? So they designed the rainbow path. So I think those resources will be developed. I think that there are currently resources on the UUA website, different RE curriculums for adult education and young and youth education around elevator speeches. How do you have a conversation about what your faith is? That's not just handing somebody the 7 principles, because your faith is probably way more than just that, and it's a practice for us to be able to develop that muscle of being able to explain what our faith means to us. But those resources will definitely, if this gets passed and approved, those resources will be developed.
I just want to say that there's already a Facebook for religious educators. It's been established since the draft was presented to the UUA board for religious educators to talk to each other about how do we actually transmit this. And similar to the creative energy that happened around the transition to shut down during the pandemic, I'm confident that there's going to be robust creative awesomeness happening on that Facebook page and elsewhere to make sure that we're able to convey these things in succinct, learnable fashion. And of course, they're just a draft still. So it's hard to know exactly where to land and how to begin to introduce them in each congregation.
And one other note, I'll just add the image that is utilized by the Article 2 Study Commission in their revision. They did not develop that. That was a religious educator that sent them that as a recommendation and said that we could use it. And we're like, yes. Because before it was just a PowerPoint little ovals with love in the center, and that is what happens when you let religious educators do their thing.
We have time for one last question, I think, here in the room. Laura?
Okay,
You
I don't want
introduce
to.
yourself?
Yeah, hi, Laura from Countryside here. I don't want to end this on a negative, but I'm just wondering, is there any organized resistance to anything in this document that we're not talking about?
Yes.
So this is evidently a naive question, but that's what we're here for, right?
So yes, before this was even presented, a movement to save the principles was started. So there are folks that are organizing against any amendments to the principles, and I think that's kind of, to me, that's kind of leading into the dogmatism of the principles, that it's so inherent that people don't want it to even be touched. That is an example of why it's important that we continue to review and move and progress. When you get to a point in that there's a specific interpretation of one specific principle that is creating a whole movement, that's a separatist movement, I think that leads into the question of why we need to have these changes, that it's become a dogma and a creed within our tradition. So including them and finding a way to include the 7 principles into our new language and progressing is very important.
Thank you. So it's resistance to change, perhaps, not a particular thing in this new article.
Yes, the resistance started before the amendments were ever presented.
Thank you.
Before we break for lunch, I wanted to respond to a point that Carl was making at the end there, in case anybody was missing it, looking at the request for CAUUC, our organization, to have a larger diversity of opinion on this subject matter. And allow me to say that this was not intended to be a debate to challenge whether we should accept this. This is the process that was followed, where every congregation and person in a congregation had opportunity. Maybe you did, maybe you didn't provide input, but there's still chance that lies ahead. And so our role is to communicate to people what actually the process is, to allow you an opportunity to get involved in the last steps before this would go to a vote, where at that point we will all have opportunity if we're delegates. So thank you for the opportunity and thank you for your time here.
Yeah, the debate takes place in your congregations. It's up to your congregation if you want to approve these amendments. We very much encourage that process. The study commission has already stated that just the conversation itself happening in congregations about our identity as Unitarian Universalists is more than enough. If this is not approved, that's perfectly fine. We have no commitment to the end result. It's the conversation about our identity and our commitments as Unitarian Universalists and our promises that our congregations make to each other. That is a vital, important conversation to be happening. And we're just happy to have gotten feedback from folks to help draft this and hope that folks will be able to have good debate and conversation with you in your congregations that's respectful and honors that we are a diverse community with wide variety of opinions and ideas, and that we are looking for what is our center. What is our center as a faith?
Any other? Rivernight?
One suggestion. If you open up, I love the principles too, and if you
Give her the microphone.
We do have a discussions time this afternoon, but I was just thinking to the point of the gentleman about the principles being kind of crisp and easy to communicate. I have that attachment as well. But if you look at page 21 of the document, it is a page that does provide the new values with, there is a brief statement and then a more expansive commitment underneath them, but I'm trying to use that for myself to say, could these be things I adopt in, you know, as well as the principles? It's just more summary than the giant document. And we should have it for our discussion.
I'll add to that. I think what's not in words, but what is meant in the way that the study commission presented the values section is we value blank because blank, therefore we blank. And that's kind of the flow that they were using in that process. And if that's helpful for folks in building your own elevator speech, you don't have to say, you can say we value this for your, and you can explain why you value it and what your commitment is to it. But the shared values that between our congregations is what's being presented in this draft.
I just wanted to reiterate the point that the reason why we're doing this is because it is written into our structure that we do this, that we do exactly this, so that we don't get overly attached to any particular word or statement or thing, that we continue to reflect. That is part of who we are. And that it is, I think, sort of amazing that it was coming up before that 15-year marker. The call was coming from within and from the congregations and from the people of the congregations to say, but what about this? We would like to think about this language, and we'd like to think about adding this. And it coincided with the process that was, you know, going to be, you know, coming due, and I think by law mandated, and that we're so a very thoughtful process has been put in place to answer that and to help us to go through a discernment process for that reason.
I just thought it might be helpful to compare the United States Constitution has within it instructions for how to amend the U.S. Constitution. So do the UUA bylaws. This consideration happens on a schedule from time to time, and it's because our bylaws instruct us to do it that we're doing it now.
Okay, with that, I think we need to take a break. And Karen, maybe you can come up and explain a little bit about during lunch for the people who are meeting in person here, the opportunity we have for people to get to know each other a little better.
Right, so we figured this is a rare opportunity for us to commune with people from other churches across the area. So we came up with a little activity. Each one of you will receive a card, and your assignment is to find somebody that you never met before today. There are questions on this card, and just share with each other your answers to these questions. So.
All right, so we'll be breaking until 12:45. I will, at 12:45, when we regroup, we're going to be separating into breakout sessions, the 3 different breakout choices, and people could look through the questions, and based on your role and interest, you could decide which of those groups you might wish to join. And for the people on Zoom, I know we'll check to see how many participants are remaining at 12:45, but we will create breakout rooms for the Zoom participants as well. We'll break until 12:45. Thank you. Please come on in and get settled. Everybody's going to want to get home because of all the snow. Okay, is there a representative for, maybe we start with, well, let's start with Irene, because Irene, you're right here with the notes from the board related group. Why don't you, could you come up here and share? I'd like you to come up here and summarize, read your notes. You don't have to read them, but you can.
I'm gonna look at them and then I'm gonna see what I think before points I was saying. Okay, we were the group of leaders.
Here, please speak.
We were the group of leaders. I took some notes here, hold on. So with board leadership, we want to promote healthy dialogue and help ground the conversation in history, and to remind people that what the articles are and what they aren't. They're not an elevator speech, and remember that these are the bylaws. Some of the ways to engage with people would be, of course, to have sermons from the pulpit, to have forums after service or breakout listening groups, Zoom groups. A suggestion was made that we could go back and take each of the pieces in segments rather than as a whole, and maybe each week or in each breakout group or whatever you determine would work on one aspect of it and have conversation. About what? Yes, I'm getting to that. Okay, delegates. Board, the board can vote on, so how do you choose the delegates is the question. And each congregation is allowed 2 delegates for 50 people. And then is it a single delegate after that for every 50? And the question of how do you choose your delegates came up. And the congregation headed by the board can think of how they want to choose their delegates and how the delegates would vote. Do the delegates vote by their conscience, or do they vote according to whatever a vote might be in the congregation? So part of the process would be to educate the delegates as well as the congregation. Let me look here. Some of the ways to discuss, again, bulletin boards, discussion with affinity groups, doing surveys, doing cottage meetings, Zoom, chairs in the circle, trying to have exciting conversations. It kept coming up how important it was to put this in historical perspective, that this is a continuous review of the Article 2 and our bylaws, and that we are committing to do this with other congregations. Also was brought up about grief, that letting go of something that you've held dear, there's a grief process involved in that, and that there are stages of grief such as anger, denial, acceptance. And for many of us, it may not be acceptance yet, but that part of these discussions should lead us to maybe work through some of those stages of grief. It was this I liked about discerning, and that's speaking to disagreement, that there will always be disagreement, and that, you know, this is part of what we have in our congregations as in life. We want to continue to go back to say why, then figure out what we want to say. And Marie brought up, why is it important to make these changes? That we should be asking ourselves this question, why is it important? So I think the 3 things, like choose the delegates. How do we choose the delegates? How do we educate the congregation? And how do we sponsor an amendment? So these are this is the proposal, and what we're going to be doing now when we go back to our congregations is looking at these, discussing them, and deciding if we as a congregation want to make amendments, and then becoming part of that amendment process. There is a process that I think they're still working on, if I'm not right. There'll be an amendment process so that we can put in amendments on this. So it's not like they're gonna rewrite this, but if we have an amendment, if we feel strongly about something. Well, somebody brought up a very interesting point where it says, this is for all people, like we're a congregation of all people who share our values and truly embody people who include all that share our values. And do we want to limit it to that? So I thought that was a very good point of conversation when we talk about widening the circle or that everybody's on a faith journey. That kind of rang with me as something. You might want to remember that GA is starting on 6/21, June 3rd, 21st, and then mini assembly where they're going to be listening in to the amendments will be 6/22. And in February, the UUA board will have sponsored amendment workshops that anybody will be able to join, and they're working. No, I'm wrong on that. So
the February board meeting is when the board will be finalizing their amendment process.
Okay.
And that will likely include amendment workshops that will be happening sometime in the spring.
Thank you. I stayed corrected. But at the amendment workshops will then come after that, and any member of any congregation can join these amendment workshops. Let me see if there's anything else. Oh, this was interesting too. That one person said, we're not, the whole thing about people like to wordsmith, and the people who've worked on this have worked hard. They had a number of suggestions. They rewrote it after they had gotten suggestions from a number of communities. This person said, can you live with it? Like, are we going to get way down to the point, but is this something that overall you can live with? To maybe not be as picky as like, oh, that word, I don't like that word. Would this be a hill you wanted to die on? I thought that was kind of interesting. Can I agree with it? Can I agree with it overall? And then I put something here about widening the circle, seeing their point of view. Maybe this is beyond our congregation, like having other people, maybe other young people, or neighbors or whatever, people in different congregations, different faith communities, trying to see their point of view and having accountability at the local level. Could we reach out to other congregations or a friend or a young adult or RE to get their feedback on what they think of the principles? And part of finally, I guess somebody brought up the mission creation process, finding out why people have left and exit interviews. That the key to our survival is widening the circle, and who would we include? Who are the future people who are going to be taking this congregation, this organization into the future? Somebody pointed out it was a generational thing, opening the door wide, and that to have younger people and people LGBTQA and the 8th principle, that how are we going to serve, and who are we going to serve? That's all I got.
Thanks, Irene. There's a reason why you're the secretary. That was a great summary. Is somebody from the religious education group prepared to speak? Oh, great, thank you. And we didn't get to meet, so please introduce yourself when.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth McCreelis. I am the Director of Lifespan Religious Education at First Unitarian. So our group was talking about religious education, and with, I guess, 2 lifespan religious educators in the group, we reframed the questions a little bit. So our first part of the conversation was to basically frame the question of how do we foster participation in this conversation within our congregations in general, and how do kids and young people fit into that? And a major topic of focus among our, like across our whole conversation was youth voice. And just each person, really each member's voice just mattering and including young people and truly believing that their voices matter. So we talked some about age segregated conversations and intergenerational conversations. And the conclusion we basically came to was that there would be a lot of value in having parallel tracks where there are conversations that include adults and young people and are intentionally intergenerational, intentionally accessible to the young people, and that there's age segregated conversations where the young people can have space held for them specifically, and where maybe some children or young folks who might not feel comfortable sharing in front of the adults or the, you know, different groups, that they could have some safer, braver spaces. And with that, we viewed that our youth, like our high school youth, maybe our middle school youth, actually play a really critical intermediary role between the generations, as being able to participate more fully in the adult process and really engage. And so we I guess, really came to the conclusion that it would be important to make space for the older youth who can engage with the adult process to be fully included, and then also to include them in child and youth conversations where they would be able to basically take what they're learning from participating in the adults conversations and model that for the younger kids, and in that way really build capacity among our children and youth for engaging in these type of processes and engaging in these type of conversations and topics. I think that was really the critical takeaway from our conversation. There were some other details that we talked about, like adapting a curriculum that exists around Article 2 for intergenerational use, about maybe introducing these conversations and topics at youth cons or youth camps, about giving space for youth delegates to represent the congregation at GA, or including in the process a vote where the youth could have a vote. Like, we realize that may depend on like the individual congregations, like, you know, bylaws and how they do that, but finding a way within the process for a youth vote as being a full part of the congregational process. And I think that's about what we covered. Thanks.
Thank you, Elizabeth. And last but not least, who is the representative from the social justice team?
Step up to the mic. Okay, so conversation was kind of around setting the expectation that we would engage people within our congregations would engage in social justice activities, and creating some goals for getting people involved. So that was certainly one of these suggestions. There was some discussion around maybe expanding the point you were making, Leslie, about expanding the definition of
there was
areas of engagement.
The phrasing about I wish I had the text here about racism and other oppressions. My point was that by calling out only racism, you were dismissing sexism and homophobia as significant as oppressions, because sexism and homophobia kill. If they don't kill you, they diminish your life and your social, psychological and emotional lives. So a phrasing that would include, and also oppression, racism and sexism, homophobia are specific expressions of a mindset that says some people are not human. So if we include that in our values, fighting one leaves the others untouched. If we said something to the effect of dismantle all races, all systems of oppression, or turn it around in a more positive way and say, we affirm the worth and dignity of all people. You will have heard that before, and work to dismantle all forms of oppression is a far more inclusive phrasing for working on a problem that is systematic in our society. So that was, we spent a lot of time talking about how we might do that and what it means for what oppression actually means and how it just sort of seeps into your life. So it was accountability in the sense that we are accountable for more than just one oppression. We are accountable for dealing with all oppressions that diminish people.
We had a little bit of conversation around what different effective forms of engagement might be. Talked a bit about partnering with other organizations in the community aside from just our own congregation or even other Unitarian congregations. I mean, there are other organizations, some being churches and others being just other nonprofits that are engaged in social justice activities that you can partner with, get a lot of leverage and be more effective. But you need to build those relationships ahead of time and have those relationships at your beck and call when you do run into that opportunity to get something done. So we think there's work to be that can be done there.
There's also some discussion about the ideas that we don't show up claiming to have all the answers. We show up to ask the group what they need, what we can do to help them accomplish that goal, and that we take direction from that group. It's probably not an easy thing to do, but you want to just work with the group and be there to help them and support them rather than show up and sort of settle everybody's hash and then ride out of town.
Let's see, just another thought that was talked about a little bit is you have to sell it. So if we're going to try and set the expectation in congregations that we're going to be active, you have to make it attractive. You have to make it social. You have to make it fun to get people engaged. How do you do that?
You throw a party and brownies. Chocolate always works.
Alcohol where necessary.
Thank you to all the groups and to everybody here that engaged and spent their day, a valuable Saturday, discussing important topics about our important faith and trying to find a way to make sure that we, in the future, have a faith tradition that's in alignment with what the needs of the world are. Thank you so much for being here. And with that, we dismiss everybody, although you feel free to have conversation and help clean up if you're not too far away.
Good job.